And we are live. I would like to welcome Ernest Wohnig, who's currently the Senior Vice President for Systems One. Welcome to the show, Ernest.
Great. Thank you, David. And I see you're maintaining your bunker background there. So,
Absolutely. I'm working towards, kind of highlighting myself a little bit more. So, it's all about the lights.
Well, the lights, sure, you stand out. That's good. So.
Yeah, the contract is there. So, welcome to the show. And, as a preparation for this conversation, I looked at your background and it's super impressive. You spent some time in the military and then you transitioned to quote unquote the civilian life, and you've done really well for yourself. So why don't we start by maybe from the beginning? Like, how did you become an intelligence officer, and maybe kind of go from there?
Right. Well, like every young man who intends to join the Air Force, my first intent and desire was to be a pilot. Unfortunately, the pilot billets were full, among other reasons, and I had actually shifted quite honestly, from engineering to political science anyway, in my degree coming out of undergrad. So I was probably a little better prepared for intelligence in that regard with the change. And I'm also proof that you don't necessarily need to come out of college with a technical degree to actually, work in cybersecurity and hopefully be successful. So the Air Force, I was commissioned, went in Intel. You do a year of training out in Texas for that after school. So basically school just means college means you can be taught basically to the military. And then I got my first assignment out in South Carolina with Central Air Force, which was then supporting basically operations in the Middle East and so forth. And
Before we jump into that, I just want to peel the onion a little bit. So first of all, love the fact that you mentioned that you don't necessarily have to be, as you mentioned, have an engineering degree or computer science and so on to be successful. And secondly, because it's all about aptitude to learn, right? It's all about how you,
exactly.
And then you mentioned the 1 year training. What I'd like to kind of unravel here is that this is not regular training. The type of Air Force training you get in 1 year, it's almost like the difference between regular milk and condensed milk.
Absolutely.
The intensity of that 1 year. Maybe you can cover that a bit.
They take you, put you in let's just say a condensed learning environment. Basically, it's 24/7 for a little over a year. So you're learning probably in that 1 year what most people would pick up, in 4 years of college in reality, because you're learning everything from geopolitics to the technical aspects of radar systems to how aircraft operate in combat to, and you're learning that for both our systems and for adversary systems. So you're basically becoming all the technical stuff I'd avoided by not being an engineer, I basically had to pick up again because we were doing more operational intelligence at that point. So you have to understand how collection systems work, and the most important part for our discussion, how communications work, how communication technology works. And that, even though the Air Force in the mid 90s didn't have, information warfare as a career, so to speak, we did have something called C3, which was command control communications. So it was more about breaking the other side's communication and control capabilities. But a lot of it sort of bleeds over into what we now call information warfare, cyber warfare, whatever you want to call it. It's just at that point, it was a lot more physical. It was about going in and breaking communication lines and bringing towers down, all that kind of stuff. But you still had to know where were the important nodes, what part of the system was really critical, what was going, you do all that analysis now that we tend to do, or our teams tend to do in network operations centers about what's the critical aspect of the system, what are we defending, what are the vulnerabilities, and the adversary on the other side is basically playing the game that me and my compatriots used to play, which is, okay, what are the critical aspects that we can go in and have maximum impact with minimal, push.
And it's also really interesting the way these programs they tend to do a great job at molding you to think a certain way. And I find that you come in, with various different backgrounds, but when you come out uniformly, you're very similar to others that finish the program. Do you find that that allow you to, later on when you graduate from that program and graduate from the service, allow you to uh, take those skill set and apply them into your next role?
Oh, absolutely. There was a reason that for the longest time in the Air Force, um, information operations, as we called it then, defensive and offensive, pretty much resided for the longest time inside the intelligence arm versus the operational arm of the service. When I graduated from Intel school, so to speak, went to my first assignment. Like I said, we were doing C3, but we weren't really looking at information warfare as we now traditionally think about it. And of course, I was a young, brash lieutenant who had read his Toffler and was third wave and war and anti-war. And I was basically, I would annoy the colonel in charge of our intelligence squadron, basically going, we need to do that. We need to think about these things. This is where it's going. These are this is the future. And finally, he's like, okay, fine, Lieutenant, then, I've set up a briefing. Eventually, I wound up briefing General Jumper, who was the commander of CENTAF at the time, and then eventually became Chief of Staff of the Air Force, on this with my team. And basically, a couple of weeks later, the Colonel calls me to his office. I'm like, you get that note, basically come to the principal's office. I'm like, what have I done? Again, I'm a stupid second lieutenant, so there's any number of things I could have done. But I get in, he slides a memo across his desk and basically says, okay, Lieutenant, you're now the excuse me, you're now the intel liaison for the first information warfare squadron. And we basically, at that point, myself, I was not in charge by any stretch of the imagination. Again, second lieutenant. But it was a colonel by the name of Dusty Rhodes, Dusty's call sign, and a number of other junior officers. And basically, we're sort of this special access squadron standing up for the Air Force, the first information operations capabilities from an operational standpoint. So it was an exciting time. That's when we were first trying to figure out, what did this really mean? How do we, we were working with both the operational community as well as the intel community, and eventually with the larger national security community in regards to, what does this mean from a technical standpoint, operational standpoint for the military, defensive standpoint for the country. And when I transitioned eventually out of the Air Force and eventually did a couple of years as an analyst at Defense Intelligence Agency, what did we need to do from a national security standpoint, and what was the national strategy going to be? Which, quite honestly, I'm not sure we still have a national strategy, but that's a different story. So the lovely part of this was that I, a non-computer science guy, love of technology, mind you. I mean, I still love technology in all aspects, and I read stuff that across the spectrum from national security level, if you will, national grand strategy, all the way down to technical vulnerabilities. So one of the great things about our field is you can do that, and you can operate in any of those environments, right? So the nice thing was, when I got to DIA and became a senior analyst there, I got to deal with the national level intelligence community. I led a few national intelligence estimates, working with the White House, national intelligence brothers across the pond in terms of both outside the DC Beltway and inside the DC Beltway, and as well as other places in the world. So it gave me a great opportunity to see how the sausage was made or is made. Unfortunately, I was not realized I wasn't really cut out for government in the long term, apparently, at least not at that point. Frustration in terms of how quickly things move. Government has a certain pace at which it moves. All bureaucracies do. I've certainly since learned to appreciate that, but at the time I was, fast. We must go faster. We must go faster, and eventually took a position outside the government with Booz Allen, and got the opportunity to sort of come in and help build and then lead a practice for cyber across federal and commercial energy space, which was cool.
How was that transition? It's not, again, it's not trivial. A lot of times I've seen veterans struggle because, as you mentioned, you were a lieutenant with the responsibilities, and there's hierarchy in the military that has to be followed, and the management style is very different. There's a lot of nuances there, and you come into this and you're laughing because you know where I'm going with it. So
Yeah,
how was that?
it was interesting. Now, the nice thing is the government gives you the technical skills. They give you the programmatic skills because you have to, especially as an officer or as an NCO, you have to be able to lead and make things happen. What the military doesn't necessarily do is give you the social skills, let's say, when you're operating in let's say, a less command and control environment. So luckily I did have that couple of years as a federal employee, so I got a little better in regards to that because it's less structured, even though its structure is a little less structured hierarchically than the military obviously is, from a service member standpoint or an officer standpoint. But it was a bit of a shock going into private sector. One of my first clients actually was the Department of Energy, so I still wasn't quite away in the true commercial sector, if you will, but it was definitely away from DoD. And one more interesting thing was walking into the building, and first thing you see at the elevator is this thing about the employee union, and I'm like going, what's a government union? What does that have to do with anything? Not realizing at the time there's a lot to do with a lot of things. And we can talk about that in regards to cyber culture and so forth, because it definitely comes back. But to your point, my first year at Booz, my first assessment, if you will, and I'll put it on the table, got really good marks for, program management and technical skills and, getting things done, if you will. My one markdown, if you will, that probably, it doesn't surprise me now, but obviously the shock at the time was basically engagement with customers. And what it was is that I would go in, I would sit down with the customer, and basically I have a list, if you will, of, okay, this is the project, this is what we need to do, blah, 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 blah. Here's the things. I wasn't building a rapport with with a senior manager who was responsible for the program at the time.
I think to your defense, it's not something you had to do, prior, right? There's very little rapport building.
Exactly. When you go into a colonel's office, you don't really, especially as a lieutenant or a captain, which when I left, you're there for a purpose. That purpose is to be executed, and you're to leave the room, forthwith for the most part. I mean, occasionally, the office, the officers club weren't a big deal then, but occasionally you have socials. There was the opportunity to build, but more of a mentor to mentee relationship versus, the civilian government sector and the commercial sector where, people want to feel they have a connection with you and they want to build a trust bond, right? In the military, you sort of have that built in. You wouldn't be there if you didn't share similar visions, and you wouldn't have generally you wouldn't have the rank that you held unless you had certain capabilities. Not all of them are the same, but basically there was a accepted level of capability and trust just that you sort of walked in the door with, based on being a member, wearing the uniform, and to a certain level in terms of capability, what rank you had achieved up to that point. None of those symbols, if you will, exist, really in the private sector. I mean, we all can buy the same suit or the same outfit or whatever. Not that anyone wears suits anymore, it seems. But you have to build rapport.
Golf shirts.
Yeah, golf shirts, open polo, whatever.
So this is so interesting. What do you think displaces that in the civilian life? You mentioned suits, which we don't do. Like, how do we? As you mentioned, it's so true. Like, I was an officer as well. You just due to the fact you have a certain rank, people assume that you are qualified a certain way. You don't have to prove yourself, but that's not the case when you meet somebody, through Zoom or otherwise. How do they gain that trust? Do they?
Yes, well, and that's one of the things I think for the industries, that's a big issue, and part of this also goes back to something in terms of workforce and leadership development that maybe we can talk about in a little bit. But a lot of there's two parts to this, right? There is the interpersonal relationship. Now, it depends if you're operating within a company as a member of the cybersecurity team, for example. There's the usual trust building that goes on. Basically working with people, operating within groups, and as a manager or as an executive, you need to build the esprit de corps. And it's more difficult in the commercial or even the government civil sector because, again, you don't have those aids that you have in the military service environment. But it can be done. It's almost the traditional, how do you build an organization? That's something we sometimes lose in the technical functions. CIOs, CISOs, they grow up coming from the technical. They don't come through a technical aspect or technical path to their position, and then they wind up advised and mentored a number who basically come into the CISO position or the CIO position, and they're like, first thing we generally wind up engaging on is some sort of aspect of their program, right? Whether it's technical, cultural, whatever. But then from a consulting side, once you build a certain level of trust in terms of you've given them good advice, you've shown them that you quite honestly know what you're talking about. Then you'll get the question about, well, you've been around for a little while. Can you tell me how other people or how you would address, this cultural problem or this organizational problem? So in a lot of ways, we still prove ourselves from a capability standpoint, and then that winds up branching out. When I was director for cybersecurity for a large energy company, I spent a lot of time because it was spread across 18 different countries. So I'm coming in as, let's be honest, typical American, if you will. But I've got people in South America, in East Asia, in Middle East, in Europe, especially Eastern Europe at the time. And so you're having to learn I was having to learn how to engage with people across not just the sort of director to personnel standpoint, the managers to our interns and our younger employees, but also the cultural aspects of engaging with someone in South America, even within South America in different countries, and the same thing in other parts of the world. Different aspects of, like we talked about earlier, in terms of how direct are you, how much engagement do you build versus how quickly do you get to the point, if you will. Some cultures you wind up having to, it's not just sitting down for a few minutes and talking about their daughter's basketball team, which was how I solved the DOE civilian problem, engagement problem. But then also, you have to sit down in some countries, you sit down and you have to, you have tea, you have drinks, you share a meal. all these things that sort of build a sense of camaraderie and trust. But to get to that level, you still need the technical skills. You still need either technical or programmatic skills to engage. Some part of the way the industry we've addressed that obviously is with certifications, right? In terms of sort of that first step. And I'll be quite honest, I politely, way to put this, I poo-pooed the whole certification aspect for a number of years, because I'm like, part of it was probably a little bit of arrogance on my part, which I realize now. I was like, no, well, I was there early on. I've grown up. I've done these things. Why do I need a piece of paper to certify that I understand, the importance of encryption or, access management or what have you. But just like we talked about in terms of the uniform with the military, certification is sort of that way of building at least an initial level of, okay, this person understands, at least on the basic level, I know what a cyber program is composed of and what aspects need to be dealt with in terms of, technology, for example, or operational processes. So the certification sort of is that door opener, if you will, to building trust. But then you got to walk through and you've got to engage and prove it, right? So the first part is proving that you didn't just study and take the exam, but you actually know that of which you speak, excuse me. And then also you've taken it and processed it into something that you can offer as value to the team or to the company, or, a little later on to a client that will, again, provide value to them in regards to their business or in regards to the operations of the business.
It's so interesting because you spent time in the military and then you were a consultant working for a large enterprise. And then you moved into a role within the enterprise as a security director. And now you're coming back to kind of the consultative side. So you have a kind of very wide view of how things are in kind of different sectors. Do you have a preference? Like if you had kind of the choice today, which one do you like to be more? Do you want to be on which side of the desk do you like to be in? Do you want to be in the enterprise, or do you feel more comfortable being on the consultative side?
That's a harder question than you might think to answer. There are pluses and minuses to both, right? For the consulting side, you get to go out and generally, you're experiencing all kinds of different environments, all kinds of different clients, because most engagements are, short term, relatively, let's say anywhere from, a few weeks to a few months to maybe some large company, large activity, 6 months to a year. Mm-hmm. And then on the federal side, it may be a case where you have people working contracts for 2-3 years or so before you switch to another environment, another client, what have you. But the nice thing about being inside a cybersecurity director or a CISO is that you own the problem, right? As a consultant, basically you provide your expertise. You do the analysis or figure out the redevelopment of the program. You provide that to the client. You tell them this is what we believe you should do. This is based on experience, best practices, standards, whatever you're basing it on. And then they have the option to basically go, oh, that's interesting. Or hopefully what they do is they take it and they engage with it. And, they, based on that, you might even come back and basically help them, in regards to how to put that, hopefully that plan or that opportunity, technical capability into place, or program capability into place. But on the opposite side, and this is why my favorite, I think, is, even though I've spent less time there, is being on the operation side where you own the problem. Of course, it might also be that I'm not, while it's a function of being a consultant, it's the least attractive part to me is going out and having to do that initial come in cold call type of situation. Luckily, I don't have to do as many of those as I would have in the past, just based on where I'm at. But like I said, there's nothing in my mind quite like waking up in the morning and basically going, okay, what am I going to do to make the business better today, if you will. Or also there's the national security level, which is it's not consulting, that's more operating inside that realm, which is quite as attractive. While it's frustrating from the bureaucratic standpoint, if you will, again, the function of bureaucracy, as I mentioned before, the thing I've learned since is that, but you're dealing with big issues. And while it takes time, your impact, when you're in that level is significantly broader. And you can do that as a consultant too. It's just that you're again, it's more of an advisory role than an actual implementing and doing role, for lack of a better term.
So I think part of the engagement you have today is, and the kind of the benefits is you see a lot of commonalities, right? So you're seeing various type of customers, and they come over and you have the chance to talk to them about some issues and so on, and then you kind of the aggregator of all these issues, and you're able to review some of these responses, some of these answers, the solutions to common problems. In talking about big issues, right?
Right.
From speaking to customers today, what are kind of the top one or two major issues that you see surfacing over and over again in terms of cybersecurity?
Well, I mean, everyone likes to talk about the technical aspects, the ransomware. We've spoken about that, especially as it becomes more of an operational versus just a data issue. And we can talk about that certainly. But the bigger, quite honestly, long-term issues that I see really deal with workforce, right? We were just talking about before about what happens when you move up the chain to become a CISO. But even inside even at the entry and then practitioner and manager levels, we just don't have enough people for the sector. So what we're running into is, at least in part of the problem we're having is in regards to these high value, high impact issues, is people don't have the skill sets, right? We don't, or if they do, they're in such limited supply that they can't meet demand. Cloud helps somewhat with this because basically one of the advantages of cloud is that while you retain responsibility, you always retain responsibility. You can sort of push some of that risk out to your service providers, cloud service providers.
What about automation, orchestration, and then maybe kind of the buzzwords like machine learning and AI that have been thrown out there a couple of times?
Oh yeah. So in regards to AI is both going to destroy us and save us. So it just depends. You have to pick the day of the week as to determine which it's going to be. AI will have, and that's one of the things that we within System One are looking at right now. To be quite honest, it's one of my pet areas. Let's put it that way. From a service capability standpoint, the AI revolution, for lack of a better word, that we're seeing is going to be one of the major impacts in terms of both giving us more capabilities, but it's also it's going to expand the risk profile that we face. And people generally look at one or the other, not at both, and that's part of this issue. I spoke on this specific issue when I was in Berlin a couple of years ago. So the nice thing about AI is that it can be taught. We'll be able to use it to sort of eventually take over that first level, if you will, the first tier at in a SOC NOC environment. I truly believe that's going to happen. The problem there is that while it will then be a force multiplier for good in terms of augmenting the work, the workforce overall, just like every other technology, the adversary is going to leverage as well. So now instead of dealing with, someone going out into the dark web and buying a botnet and, a vulnerability and maybe access, sort of building their own threat matrix to then perpetrate against a particular company, sector, or what have you, you're going to see the move to automate a lot of that within an AI environment. So instead of a bunch of hackers sitting in a room, you're going, for lack of a better word, or let's be honest, in a nation state level, a bunch of state actors in a room, you're going to see, how, for lack of a better term, a better analogy.
Or maybe Watson.
Or Watson. Well, Watson, yeah. I mean, Watson, you can already buy time for Watson for a number of things. We have relationships with companies that already do that. Or there are others that are out there. Azure will basically let you build your own AI now, as will Google and others. So the fact is that we're going to see more defensive and offensive capabilities, just like we've seen with cyber for the last 2 decades. The scary thing is that over the term, what used to be, say, 10 years ago, a state actor level capability is now in the hands of a group of criminals operating out of, say, Eastern Europe or something, and that is only going to accelerate with AI.
So are people concerned about it? Like when you're meeting with customers, do you get like questions about what should we do, or is it so far out that people are not really thinking about it? Just saying, okay, this is something that we know is coming, but right now we shouldn't worry about it.
Well, I mean, yeah, from an operational standpoint, most companies are, this is not a high priority issue for them. They're trying to figure out how to, manage basic cyber hygiene and, transition if possible to, passwordless.
Turn on MFA and so on, right?
Turn on the MFA, but also move beyond passwords to, to the YubiKeys of the world, if you will.
Yeah.
Government is more, it's more in the forefront because there's money there. Also, so research, government entities love research functions, national labs, especially in the U.S., but also China, Russia, all are investing heavily in AI, obviously. And I guarantee that's not all for, to build better playgrounds.
Yeah. So I have a question in regards to that, and I know it's a little out there, but do you think a case of, a AI malware escaping a AI lab, like a virus would, is it something that's possible?
Well, since NSA managed to lose their entire tool suite a few years ago, I unfortunately have to say yes. Now the question will be, when that happens, is it intentional? Is it accidental? Is it accidental intentional? Making the best of an accident, if you will, because one of the we kind of went to sleep for about 20 years in regards to the threat from peer actors. We were quite honest, one of the countries I was charged with understanding from a offensive and defensive capability was China during my DIA days, excuse me. But when 9/11 happened, we kind of, decided we were going to focus on, this, a direct issue in front of us, obviously. Unfortunately, what we proved is we couldn't chew gum and walk at the same time. So we focused very extensively on that issue, and much to the detriment of our capabilities and understanding, and both understanding and operating in terms of those peer adversaries, Russia, China. So
it is an arm race, right? And it's like a, it's, I don't know if it's defined like that or not, but it's definitely is. I mean, we're talking about,
My boss will tell you we're in a war. Question, and my response to that is always, well, question is whether it's hot or cold, in regards to what's happening as AI or cyber sort of does this defense, offense, like you've seen all capabilities. Defense takes a lead for a while, then offense basically takes a lead. So, but the fact is that going back to your original question about, going into the wild, the question also is, well, we've seen that because of the anonymity that can be provided by cyber. And I was only half joking about a release that was accidentally intentional. We know that a number of countries operate cyber capabilities, both in terms of their actual state agencies, but also they keep a cadre, if you will, or a corral of non-state groups that somehow magically wind up with, let's just say, capabilities that are evolved several levels of beyond what you would normally associate with a loose confederation of criminals. A lot of research and development dollars seem to go into some of these capabilities.
Is there a way to fingerprint some of those? Just like sometimes you can, talk about the virus analogy,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can kind of reverse engineer and figure out what's the origin of that. Is that also true in kind of the cyberspace?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's why a lot of your ATPs are defined by groups, or they're given fanciful names by one group, one part of the community, and simple numbers by the other. So it kind of tells you there's a dichotomy in our industry in terms of creativity, where we place our creativity. Let's put it that way. So yes, absolutely, there are fingerprints. Now, the problem is, in a lot of cases, the fingerprint may give you an understanding of, okay, well, this correlates to this capability that was utilized here, correlates to another capability, or correlates to a group. But it's hard to basically then correlate and say, yes, this group is actively acting on the behest of, there's a lot more intelligence that has to happen, and a lot of things that, let's just say, go on that we're unaware of in the open source community that have to happen to tie it to, a state level actor. There are capabilities to do that, but that's, again, those are different TTPs, that capabilities that once you let them out into the wild, the problem, or once you let that be known, then you negate them, because the adversary then changes their tactics.
I feel like we're just scratching the surface of this topic, and I would love to cover this many other topics. I think we're going to do at least one more session, and we're going to start covering.
Sure.
We're going to jump in. But before we do that, I'd love to, for you to provide your information, just so how people can reach out to you if they need some advice, or, maybe continue or pick your brain about some topics we discussed and so on.
Oh, sure.
What's the best way?
So obviously email is the traditional. Do you want me to give you that? Or
sure. Yeah,
so,
go ahead.
So it's eWohnig@syst1.com. So I can also be, probably the easiest way to find me is on LinkedIn, to be honest. Ernest Wohnig LinkedIn, or eWohnig also on Twitter. I don't play as much around there. I tend to look at that more to satisfy my national security interests, hobbies. But I'd say LinkedIn's the easiest one to reach out.
And maybe we always discuss some pretty heavy topics, so I like to always wrap up with some positive tones. We cybersecurity professionals seems to talk about a lot of things that might happen, or on the negative side, but the sky's not falling yet. What are the kind of the positive trends that you're seeing that potentially we can take away from this conversation?
Sure. So we haven't unleashed Skynet yet, which is good. But AI, there are some discussions about ethics in regards to AI. So that's a good thing. The other thing that just from a cyber, looking specifically at the industry, the development of quantum computing, I think, holds a lot of promise for the community in terms of sort of solving a number of technical bugaboos that have existed long term in cybersecurity. So, when you can actually start syncing, atoms in different locations and using them as sort of a ability to move data without having to go through in sort of unassailable encryption, then that builds, it poses some other issues in regards to national security, bad guys talking, what have you. But from a strictly commercial industry aspect, it holds a lot of promise in terms of solving, like I said, a lot of those issues in regards to IP protection and internal communications capabilities, and being able to, even if you have data compromised, being fairly confident that there are ways to keep it secure. Now, there's negative sides to that, which we'll talk about another time. So since we're ending on a positive note,
yeah, we will for sure, because I heard quantum computing can destroy the way we encrypt today, right? So the whole encryption, SSL and so on, will have to be redefined.
Well, like everything, it has it has a potential for good and a potential for bad. Let's just say. Now, the other good thing I will say is that cyber is gotten a lot of it. It's gotten more of the attention I think it needs. We're still not there in how we work through some of the problems, but the level of awareness now, say today versus 10 years ago versus a generation ago, if you will, is significantly higher, and it's now an attractive place for people to come into, which is great. We're attracting groups of people from all walks of life. The industry is becoming much more diverse, which is great in terms of thought process. So we avoid the echo chamber, if you will, and we have to be careful because I was just reading. One university was saying, "Oh yes, take our 24-week course and become a cyber expert or cyber professional." And I'm like, I'm not even sure I consider myself truly a cyber professional. I'm not sure 24 weeks is really the time frame that's going to work. But the education opportunities are out there. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a matter of national security. We need more. It takes a village to protect. I mean, we need more people to get in the industry. So that trend is very positive as well.
Yeah.
And it's been a real pleasure having you, and we'll schedule a new session, and we'll peel the onion on a couple other topics, because especially in the cybersecurity space. So we're looking forward to doing that. So thank you very much, and again, for everybody who was watching today, thank you again. Comment and subscribe, and looking forward to seeing you in the next session.
Excellent. Thank you for the opportunity, David. Appreciate it.